Welcome, everyone. So this is a panel for big data principles for GRC. And we have three panelists with Matthew Moocarme, Oleg Vilchinski, and Vidya Phalke. As they come on stage, Matthew is Director and Senior Data Scientist with Viacom. Oleg Vilchinski is the Vice President and Head of the North American business for EPAM Systems, one of our partners with MetricStream. And Vidya Phalke, most of you might know, is the Chief Innovation and Cloud Officer for MetricStream. What most of you may not know that Vidya was also CIO of the year 2017 Bay Area. And great to have all of you on the panel. So the key discussion points today, we are looking into potential use cases and principles that big data analytics can bring in the field of GRC. And as data-driven decision-making becomes ubiquitous, there's some interesting use cases across industries where big data can help not only in understanding past trends, but also in predicting the future risk postures, and coupled with AI, that can be a very powerful engine overall with big data and analytics put together to really run an organization and make decisions based on the power of big data, which we'll talk about. And with this, I will go into the first part of the topic where I'd just like the panelists to introduce themselves and maybe talk a couple of use cases on big data that they've seen making the most impact in the world. Matt, do you want to go first?
Yeah, hi. So my name is Matthew Moocarme. I'm a Director and Senior Data Scientist at Viacom. So Viacom, if you don't know, is a big media company. We're headed out in New York City. And it's really my job to analyze and ingest a lot of the social media data that we get at Viacom. So Viacom is the head of like MTV and Nickelodeon, and with that comes a lot of challenges and risks associated with dealing with the social media data, as we've seen in the news as of previously. And so a lot of use cases that we have that involves around risk is kind of ingesting that social media data and making sure that we use it in a way that's appropriate to our users. We get a lot of comments data that we analyze for emotionality. We get a lot of viewing data that we then analyze as well. So really kind of using that in the most appropriate way can make sure that we're kind of doing it appropriately. And so that's kind of one of the most use cases that we have at least for my job.
Oleg Vilchinski, EPAM. So a little bit about EPAM. EPAM is a software product design and platform development services company, right? But we largely operate in business information industry, and I'm heading the business information industry solution practice, where we typically deal with building systems of insights for our clients using cutting-edge technologies and disruptive techniques and tools. The use cases that I frequently see is a challenge of data ingestion, right? So, like even during this conference, most of you filled up the paper survey, right? But then this information is going to get ingested into the feedback review system. It gets processed, analyzed, etc. And certainly big data techniques can help to automate OCRing and then mundane task to process and input that data into proper standards and formats. So frequently we're facing with challenge of extraction specific concepts and relationship, especially relationships really between multiple concepts within textual, image data, as well as video streams, etc. It becomes a problematic space, and modern big data technologies, tools, and techniques can allow you to actually extract those insights and define linkages between them.
Thank you. My name is Vidya Phalke. More than a big data practitioner, as a GRC software vendor, the good news is we get to see how within the GRC framework our customers are bolting on big data technologies and solutions in order to foster their GRC programs. I'll give you a couple of examples. In the world of IT GRC, when you are looking at security controls, your IT controls, automation is given, right? I mean, trivial example, somebody has to verify that the passwords have a certain level of complexity or change frequently. The Active Directory and all those systems automatically tell you those things. There is no magic there. But now you start thinking about, say, financial controls. I'll give you just one example. A very large audit firm, one of our clients, has reams and reams of financial data, general ledgers that they are auditing through. Think about that pain of looking through line item by line item and trying to figure out if there are errors, if there are possibilities of any kind of frauds, and so on and so forth. So they understand on the bigger GRC construct under what process, risk, compliance, verifying those general ledgers belong. And at that level of testing controls, they actually plug in automation using, not to go into too much technical details, they use MongoDB and Hadoop technologies to really ingest tons and tons of general ledgers that they're going through audit and parse through it, detect it, find anomalies, and really start flagging real intelligent and things of importance to the top of the auditor so that decisions can be made swifter, faster, and better. So that's just one example where kind of unstructured data coupled with the realization that you need to have a GRC construct which is sustainable is used to really leverage the power of big data behind the scenes.
Thanks, Vidya. And related to that, how do you think big data and machine learning can be used as a tool to automate discovery of GRC elements like risk controls? So one level is automation, and the other level would be to automatically develop relationships between existing elements, and how can big data play a role in there?
I'll take that. Yeah. Okay. So building on to the previous examples, what we've also started to see is, especially when large organizations, and some of you are from places where thousands of controls and assessments on a daily basis is a given thing. What we have started to see is, again, looking at the risk registries, the way the tie-ups have happened across the GRC system of records and risk registers, we have started seeing use cases where customers are interested in figuring out the relevance or repeatability of certain kind of testing that's done within perhaps one business unit, how it can be applied to the other one. So they are looking for ways to find commonalities, and they start boiling down to, if you go down to the next level of detail, it is the description or the narrative around how the testing has to be done. That kind of the details there, perhaps it's tied to a specific NIST control, and there the linkage becomes obvious. But again, in the areas of non-IT, which is financial controls, HR controls, etc., it tends to be more subjective. So a lot of structured comparisons, ability to find the relationship which are using, to take your example, to an extent, the tonality of things that are being said to start at least bubbling up to the GRC professional as they're managing and constructing the GRC libraries, how they can be made more efficient. And we have seen customers that have reduced, their number of controls by 30, 40, 50% by just having that first level of diligence around using, I wouldn't say not so sophisticated machine learning, but at least fundamental rudimentary way of text analytics and sentiment analysis within the construct of GRC constraints and data that is being stored. So that's definitely one example we have seen. And if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, something that I've actually used in my day-to-day world is that one thing that I found when working with big data, and when I talk about big data, it's usually data that will not fit on my local machine. So it's anything more than a terabyte, really. And once you have big data, then you have to process it efficiently, because a lot of the times, if you can't process it efficiently, then you're getting more data coming in than you can process. So that means kind of using programmatic languages in order to pass through the data, something that can't be done manually. And then once you're there, then it's not too much of a step additionally to kind of make it GRC compliant and to kind of put in those extra steps in place to make everything compliant. An example that I've used was we look through comment data to get the emotionality on a lot of our comments on Facebook, and something that comes through with that is kind of the user IDs, and we don't necessarily need that, but and once we kind of we run AWS Macy through this data set, and that will tell us exactly if there is any PII, personally identifiable information. And even though it doesn't, we in fact just remove the user IDs, even though they don't mean anything to us and we can't extract anything from them. We just like to be safe like that, and it's something that we can easily just realize ourselves and kind of throw it out because we don't need it. And so it's simple things like this that might take a lot more for a human to do, but once you put in the automation, because you're using big data, then kind of adding these additional processes and steps in place is fairly simple. So that's like one quick example that I can think of just off the top of my head that we use in order to kind of leverage the technologies that have been used to process big data to kind of make things extra compliant, especially when it comes to like kind of GDPR, which is just kind of taken into effect a couple of weeks ago.
Just wanted to add to both comments is that it becomes much more easier to interact with different data sets that we produce. Remember those good old days when we have to go and figure out the interface to that database that sits somewhere in a different business unit? Or if it's external company even. So how much time we spent on actually figure out how to integrate. I think nowadays, with help of big data, integration is no longer a big challenge. So we can navigate across and harmonize the data sets for further use.
Thanks. How many auditors in the audience here? I think the next question would be a little controversial for especially the practitioners, the ones who do audits on a day-to-day basis, but can big data increase the precision of audit and risk evaluations by auto-suggesting remedial actions and to incidents, or even going further, auto-evaluating evidences, control samples, and reduce manual errors and effort in the auditing process?
Yeah, I think this was also part of the discussion in the previous panel on AI and its implication. I think the right question to worry about is how much are we just depending on the outcome or the output of the big data analysis to just come up with a decision. I think if we shortchange that whole process and just assume that the output generated by the machine learning or the big data algorithm is the right way to do it, I think we're gonna cause some other kind of issues which we didn't anticipate. So the fundamental use that we need to have is to just make it more palatable for the user to just see the prioritization. I mean, at times you have to go through reams and reams of data And big data and machine learning techniques can be used to just prioritize items for auditors and not for really saying that auditors stop doing your job, because at the end of the day, there is a lot more intuition that's behind this analysis. It's not just about simple, checkbox that we need to execute on.
I think I'm going to repeat the main thread of conversation across multiple sessions around AI and machine learning. That we're always going to have human in the loop, right? It's not the machine that makes the final decision, it's a human, and machine helps to really discover that and recommend potentially the right path forward. I can give an example that I was discussing at one of the conference recently, where we were brainstorming a specific use case. What if they're an individual coming to a bank and opening up the new bank account? Right? What if he or she wants to open up 2 or 3 bank accounts, but using different names, right? And then put the signature on a different name. Right? How you can visibly and efficiently detect that it's a fraudulent transaction, right? So your OCR capability can scan the signature, obviously, and you can apply deep learning techniques to learn the patterns and specific behaviors. And if you have a large enough data set, then you can potentially arrive to decisions that may be something suspicious about this or that individual that's trying to do this type of activity. And it definitely will have the human to validate all of that, but the machine could help to automate that tremendous effort going through and checking all of that. So.
Well, yeah, one thing I'd like to add that I heard from the other panel on AI earlier today was that compliance is a binary thing. It's either yes or no. You're either compliant or you're not compliant. And I think that AI and machine learning algorithms, and even just doing simple like test-driven like if-then statements can get you pretty damn far, and let the machines do the boring work and let the humans do all the creative work. That's something that I try and actively do in my job anyway. We work with a bunch of analysts, and they do a lot of data entry into Excel spreadsheets, and I could never do that. Absolutely not. I would find it so boring. So I try and help them do all the boring work so that they can do all the cool work and the interesting work. And I think that in this space, the machines could easily do a lot of this boring work in terms of compliance. And I don't think it would even take too much either. So that's kind of the route that I would want to go on if I was to ever do this.
And I guess the next question also relates down to that, Matt, and what do you do with Viacom, which is in the field of brand and reputation risk? What are some of the ways that big data can predict the impact of certain decisions and announcements and allow management to make better decision calls? Is there enough data available already?
Yeah, I think before answering that question, I would say that brand and reputation risk is more about perception of trust. And previously, up until like the last year or so, companies would actively just try and gather as much data as they could, regardless of whether they needed it or not. This could be like getting click streams or any sort of metrics on viewing, and then kind of deal with that later. And it's when we talk about perception of trust, I think it's something that Google does incredibly well at. If you think about the type of information that Google has on you, it's like mind-blowing. I mean, they have everything that you search on, and yet they're not perceived as an evil company because we kind of trust them. But when you look at a company like Facebook, especially after the scandals they've gone through over the past year, we kind of don't trust them as much. And even though they probably don't have as much data on you, and it's probably not even true anyway, because Facebook's data is more about what you want people to think about you, whereas Google is more what you actually think, because that's what you're typing into Google searches. And so brand and reputation trust is more about perception of trust. And I think that things are going to be a little bit more transparent, especially when GDPR rules really start to play out, as they will in the next 6 months. And so when it comes to managing reputation in your brand, I think now it's going to be more about being as transparent as possible and to actively show your customer base what you're planning to use with your data. And if you are GDPR compliant, then you will have to do that. And I think that will go really far in terms of managing your reputation, because no one wants a data breach.
The only thing I could probably add is that there are multiple tools out there that exist to help you to separate signal from the noise, to understand the sentiment to this or that announcement, so you're going to have that touch with audience. But I 100% agree. We all need to become more transparent. My 15 years old posting on Instagram like every second, so and I'm feeling very old because I'm not doing that. But
and just to add to that point, right? So again, what we see is brand and reputation risk is being tracked somewhere. I mean, within your large organization, probably marketing department is running a whole set of tools to do sentiment analysis anyways. So the way we think from GRC perspective is like leverage those controls or those assessments to just make sure that management gets the right visibility across your GRC framework. And as you rightly said, they're extremely powerful tools. You know, looking at with a product launch, they can tell you what kind of things are happening. And of course, we all know the story with United Airlines last year. So all that information is there live, and the learnings from there all needs to just get embedded in the GRC systems so that, you know, management can take the right decisions across the organization.
Just to add to that, again, I think my YouTube search and viewing history is always turned off, and I like Google for that. They give me that flexibility. You know, that you touched upon GDPR, and I think that's the last question for our panel, and that is new privacy regulations also bring up the need for new controls, and there is we're still learning as we go forward, but what do you think are some of these new controls that need to be in place to manage privacy regulations while we have all this efficiency that we talked about from big data? It also creates this additional complexity because of the regulation coming in and requiring disclosures in a particular format.
From our side, we work with our clients and we look into ways to instrument data anonymization capabilities so we can safely protect the data and leverage the relationship and interlinkages between the data for further work that we do. I think that's going to be a lot of attention to that, and that's what's trending. Tools are popping up here and there to do the data anonymization. Also, you know, we need to get away from mentality, get as much data as possible. I know I've been guilty of that in the past. So the new life is right on. You know, we have to make sure that we collect what we allowed to collect and what we need to collect to fit for a specific purpose or use case, and be cautious around that. So it's very easy to get carried on with capabilities and tools around big data.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that as well. You know, a few years ago, you would come to a conference like this, and then you would ask someone around the lunch table, like, how much data do you have? And that would be like, the more data, that means like the more better or something, right? But I think now we've kind of come to our senses, and like, just because you have like a petabyte of data, that doesn't mean that you're gaining any more insights than someone that has maybe just a gigabyte of like quality data. And so one thing that has forced us in our team to look at in ourselves, especially with GDPR, is like, what data do we actually have? What data do we use? And what are we going to need in the future? because that's going to allow us to kind of minimize the data that we have so that we can use it in the most effective way. And sure, that means deleting a bunch of data, but that was just kind of clogging up our systems anyway. So I think it's incredibly important just to do like a data audit for ourselves, figure out what we have and document that, and then that allows us to not only make sure that we are compliant with GDPR and any new regulations that come into place, and that we're not held accountable because we accidentally didn't delete this private piece of information that was sitting on an S3 bucket somewhere. But it probably helps our lives be more efficient as well when it comes to figuring out how we're going to solve the next problem that my boss is going to come to me screaming about. So I think the data minimization approach is useful.
Yeah, just to add to Matthew's point, I mean, at least at MetricStream, from the software design principle side of things, just like, I don't know, 20 years ago, security by design was thought as a basic construct. In terms of left shifting that kind of thinking in privacy, that's what also we are putting in our design methodology, which is privacy by design. And to both of your points, yeah, I think you need to think through, do we really need users' first name, last name, email ID, and the entire, date of birth and so on and so forth? You don't. I mean, there is an element of recognizing that where are the areas it is needed. In those areas, yeah, put the necessary controls in place so that you can do full-blown traceability later on and mask it and change it if it needs to be. But that's what privacy by design is all about. And at least in the arena of those building software, data started to kick in, and till that thing gets fully locked and loaded, yes, have mitigating controls as we have always been having in our past constructs. So it's a journey, but yeah, it is nothing that cannot be resolved by the right way of thinking about it.
And just another point to add to that, platforms make it really easy to make your data secure. You can encrypt it. They'll tell you if any ports are open on any servers that you have available. So any sort of data breaches is usually due to human error. So there should be no reason that your data shouldn't be secure if you need to have that, any sort of PII.
I think you have a question at the back.
Yeah. Hi. I guess one question I have is, are your big data sets integrated into your daily or weekly risk management process, or is it used more for just one-off research?
At least at Viacom, I work on a research team, so it's more just the one-off research stuff. But any data products that we end up building, we build quite a few. Then we kind of take the systems so we're an AWS shop, so we do everything in our AWS account. We also have a kind of an enterprise-wide AWS account in which any of our data products then go over to there, and then they kind of go over all the information security and make sure it's all buttoned up and secure before being released into production.
Any other questions?
Let me add to that also. So from the use cases that we see, I think pretty similar to what Matthew has mentioned. But however, when this topic of sustainability comes on, and you need to think about, do I need to reflect back on, say, that control testing that was done 3 months ago? We allow that data to be persisted, and you can rerun those queries and simulation if it needs to be. So at least in the MetricStream context, we have provided a framework for keeping all the data secure till the point your data retention principles kick in and we wipe it out.
I guess just as a follow-up question, with some regs coming in the next few years, like FRTB and CISO, where tremendous amounts of economic forecasts going on for years, and all your transaction data have to be all integrated very, very tightly with your risk management system. Are your firms gearing up for that?
So to an extent, yes. In terms of this kind of situation, what we are gearing more towards is at least enabling our customers to define their record retention rules, defining and putting the right controls, and then we'll figure out how to operate at scale and take out things, remove things as needed, so as to stay compliant with these regulations. Yeah.
I'll pass on that. I think that's the compliance divisions. We're working on that, so can't comment.
Yeah, it's not something that I'm really looking into, but I know that we do keep up, at least for an old media company, we do stay on top of the latest technologies. So I wouldn't be surprised if someone in Viacom somewhere was looking into it. But it's a great question. Thank you.
Yes, no other questions. We should be good to close the panel. Thank you, Vidya, Oleg.
Is this the end?
Yes.
I have one question.
Oh, please, go ahead. We have time.
Unrelated to GRC, but with advanced analytics, what do you think the impact of advanced analytics are on sports, like football, baseball, soccer, cricket?
Hey, cricket's pretty good.
I watch for soccer, though.
It's fairly, what do you think is the impact? Because when I grew up, we had arguments, who's the best shortstop, and now there's sensors and monitoring and velocity of base runners and baseballs, and I mean, there's just so much, there's just a deluge of statistics, and managers have more data to determine. What do you think is the impact?
So I don't know if you heard Gunjan's keynote this morning. I think it's just going to create even a bigger divide. Specifically because I think those who have that data and are able to leverage it to just refine that 0.1 millisecond of dash speed to 0.01 more extra second. So it will lead to that digital divide, in my opinion, but that's my personal view, not representing MetricStream here. But yeah, I think that's what it's going to do, and to an extent, it'll make sports much more synthetic. It won't more synthetic. It won't feel natural to me, with that kind of heavy usage of sensors and just trying to really manage it to the microsecond. I mean, yes, for decades the Russian gymnasts have been doing it, so it's not unknown, but it'll probably permeate through every field of sports. My little daughters, middle schoolers, when they go to their swimming classes, trying to start getting this data and really making professionals out of them at that age, it just makes me think it's very synthetic. It loses its natural appeal. But that's my personal view.
I don't know. I think it could be the way forward. I mean, if you see like what has happened in baseball, where I mean, I don't know anything about baseball. I'm British, but I know they have like some like when a batter like hits the ball, there's like some numbers above his head or something that tells you the frequency of which he's hit the ball, maybe. So that's like basic statistics and gathering data, and this has impacted the way that baseball has kind of been commentated on, because then you have this reflection of how well the batter has performed in the past. And you don't just have to stop at baseball. In fact, there was like some, I don't know why I'm talking about American sports all of a sudden, but the horse races, someone was, the coach that could figure out exactly what horse race was going to be the next like Triple Crown champion or whatever it is. He would measure a bunch of statistics around the horse. He would measure the size of the poo and how much the horse could intake. And it turned out that the size of the nostrils was very indicative of becoming a crown race winner or something. And so that was one way you could gather data. And so people have been doing it for so long now, and I think people are going to come up with more inventive ways in order to measure some aspect around how one team can get ahead of the other team. And it's just time is going to tell on what sport that's going to be and who's going to do it and who's going to have that edge and who's going to find the length of the nostril in the terms of the horse racing. So I thought it was incredibly interesting, and I'll have to find out who that was because it's going to be bothering me now, and I'll let you know.